Good afternoon, lovely people. It's Kate here from the Safeguarding Association, and I am coming to talk to you about a subject that has been popping up throughout the year. And in terms of our safeguarding spotlight, I thought now was a really good time to have that moment of reflection over what's been happening ahead of the summer. For those of you working in academic years, what's been going on over the academic year, and to really think about the role of your DSL. And particularly, does your DSL have sufficient authority to do what they need to do? And do they have sufficient status within the organisation in order to do what needs to be done? And it can be really easy to say, well, of course they do. Of course, that's the position they've taken up. Of course, they've got the authority they need to do what they want to do. But it's not always as simple as that. Sometimes we have to take a fairly big step back and look at some of the challenges that have happened, not necessarily with students, but more about perhaps that communication with staff, maybe communication and the engagement with senior managers, maybe with exec, maybe at board level, and perhaps even external to that, perhaps even in terms of not just local authority conversations, but maybe conversations with the police, maybe conversations with some of your key partners, maybe if you're within apprenticeships, maybe with some of your employers about issues that may have been coming up, things that might have been happening. And for those of you who work outside of the remit of keeping children safe in education, there isn't necessarily a specific place for the role of the DSL, the designated safeguarding lead, to sit. Within keeping children safe in education, it's really clear they have to be part of the senior management team. They have to have sufficient authority to make decisions that might bind the organisation. And they have to have it as a specific part of their job description. There are lots of other bits and pieces as well, but those are the three big areas. But if you're outside of that remit, then it can often feel a little unclear about where the DSL role needs to sit within the organisation. And that can feel very difficult, particularly if safeguarding is one of those areas that's relatively new to you, that maybe you've only had to look at because you're now getting inspected on this. And maybe it's something that you feel that maybe you're too small to have somebody specific dealing with the role. So there are a few things I just want to talk through with you. If that's where you're sitting, if you're outside of the mainstream of keeping children safe in education, and you don't have to have the role of a designated safeguarding lead necessarily, then what are some of the things and where are some of the positions that these people with these roles should be sitting? First of all, I would say that wherever this role sits, it ideally needs to be at a senior level. And you can have a couple of roles within this. So you can have somebody who is overarchingly responsible for safeguarding within your organisation. And a lot of the time, that tends to sit at governance or exec level. So somebody at a very senior level holds that position for overarching responsibility. And then there's usually somebody else appointed to deal with the operational elements of safeguarding. And that is fine. But what absolutely has to happen is the operational person has to have sufficient authority to make decisions that they need to make in order to keep the young people safe, or whatever action needs to be taken in order to fulfill their role. And the person in the strategic role absolutely has to understand what's going on in the operational role. They have to be aware of the challenges, the requirements, the some of the specifics of the role. They need to understand and be assured that whatever you are making safeguarding look like within your organization, your operational DSL is managing that. They are overseeing it, they are dealing with what they need to deal with, and they've got sufficient resource to do what they need to do. Because it's really easy to separate both, and it almost becomes a never the twain shall meet. And that becomes incredibly dangerous, because operational feel very unsupported, and strategic, or that oversight, don't really understand what's happening on the ground, and therefore don't understand the risks that may be coming towards the organisation from the safeguarding that's happening on the ground, from the safeguarding that's happening in real time, from some of the issues that are occurring, because they're maybe not getting that information they maybe don't ask for that information, they maybe don't look for the information, they maybe don't have a particularly good relationship here. And so you can end up in a really difficult, discordant position between the operational and the strategic. And that's not where we want to be. And equally, we don't want strategic dictating what happens operationally without having any understanding. Likewise, operationally, don't want to be dictating to strategic. You need the two to work together if that's what you're going to do and have those two roles. And that communication becomes even more important if you're an organisation such as a university or a large apprenticeship provider, where you have multiple schools, multiple business units, maybe multiple different arms to your institution, where you're going to need lots of information to feed through. And that clear line of communication, that clear line of who is able to do what responsibility they have, and importantly, what authority they have to do what they're doing, becomes really important. And so if that's where you're finding yourself, that you've got a bit of a potential scattergun approach to your safeguarding within your institution, one of the things I'd urge you to look at are your lines of communication, and not just between the operational elements, but importantly, between the operational and the strategic. Like I say, that often sits at that exec or governance level. So making sure that there are proper lines of communication, that each of you understand what each other is doing, and where you see safeguarding within the organisation and what that needs to look like. The other thing that needs to be considered is, what is the organisation's view on safeguarding? If you're looking at what authority does the DSL have and what status do they have, what status is the institution or organisation giving to safeguarding within its remit, within its kind of business setting? Because if that's not sufficiently high, then you're not going to get the right level of authority to the DSL. And in fact, it doesn't matter what authority you give the DSL. If your culture is that safeguarding isn't important, and that doesn't have to be a deliberate attempt, that can just be something that happens, then your DSL is never going to have the right authority or the right status to do the work that they need to do. So sometimes we really have to dig into, what does our culture look like? What does it mean for our DSL to be doing the job that they're doing? What are we asking them to do? What do they have to do? What are their legal requirements? What are their obligations under our policy? What are some of the obligations with the learners that we've got? And what does our learner demographic look like? And have we got somebody in that role who has the sufficient authority, the sufficient respect to feed into the necessary status of that particular position? Now, I know from some really awful conversations I've had with DSLs who felt really out on a limb in the position that they're in. So the organisation really doesn't want to do safeguarding. They are caught by various bits of legislation. So they are inspected. They do have to look at where they have to comply with keeping children safe in education. And they may only ever work with adult learners. And sometimes the DSLs in that position can feel very, very out on a limb, can feel very unsupported. I had one DSL say to me that the board didn't understand why they had to have that role. She wasn't getting any support in that particular role. And there were active steps by directors to really squash and push down any potential safeguarding incidents. Now, when we're talking about that age range, we're not necessarily talking about safeguarding in the same way we would for the under 18s. It can look very different. It can look very mental health heavy. It can look like there's lots of issues around domestic abuse, perhaps lots of issues around homelessness or other vulnerabilities that people may have. So we're not necessarily looking at safeguarding in terms of we're going to make a referral to the local authority, but we're looking at it from a broader, how do we protect our staff? What do we need to do to keep our staff safe in that broader remit and that broader perspective? And if you are an organisation that really doesn't get it and really doesn't understand, and I'm not asking anybody to out themselves at all, but it's useful to take some time and really think about why you're doing what you're doing. And if it is to tick boxes, then I urge you to think about how you can broaden that so you're not just ticking a box, and you can make your organisation as safe as possible for your learners and your staff. And in doing that, what you can do is really bring in the role of the DSL and really bring in how supportive you can be as an organisation for your staff. So if they are worried about something, if they are concerned about something that's going on at home that's spilling into work life, that you've got that safe culture around you, where the DSL is central to that, to really help staff feel safe and supported. And they know that if they raise a concern and they're worried about something, they're going to be able to get some support, whether that's simply signposting or some understanding of why phone calls shouldn't go through to them, why they need to protect that particular worker, perhaps from a partner calling or turning up, things like that that can go on. So that role of the DSL, regardless of where your organisation sits, can actually be really instrumental in your learners, your staff, feeling like they are somewhere safe, like they are somewhere they want to be, like they're somewhere where if they do say there is a problem, they're going to get support and not be belittled or sidestepped or put upon or just simply utterly dismissed. And your DSL can be really, really pivotal in building that culture. And to build that culture, you as leaders, you as managers, you as exec and board need to be clear what authority the DSL has. And that can include things about, in public, not dismissing steps that the DSL has taken. If you don't understand them, have a conversation separately with the DSL rather than outing them in the middle of a meeting because you don't understand what that looks like. Or if they've misunderstood the direction you want to take things, then again, you have that as a private conversation rather than a put down in the middle of a meeting or a staff room. And I've seen both happen, and both instantly, whether intended or not, instantly cause the DSL's authority and status to drop. And so people then go, why am I talking to the DSL? Because actually this is the person with the authority. This is the person that is going to make the decision. So actually, if that's who I need to talk to, that's where I'm going. I'm not dealing with this person. And then you fall into the age-old trap of, well, do we need that role if they're always going up to you? So the role of the DSL and that authority and status can really enhance or destabilize the practices that you've got. It can really help to embed a safeguarding culture, or it can very easily undo an awful lot of good that's been done if somebody's incoming and isn't given the right authority and status for the role. So if you're in that position, either the DSL, or you are looking at what that role of the DSL needs to look like over the coming 6 months, maybe you're looking at 12 months, maybe you're looking at a 5-year plan, then I urge you to think about, what do you want your culture to look like? How do you want your staff to feel? How do you want your learners, if you're in that space, how do you want them to feel? How do you want your students to feel? And how do you want to be perceived by external authorities, by external agencies? Do you want to be seen as an organisation that takes safeguarding seriously? Or are you quite happy to be seen as an organisation that has a policy and a procedure, but actually we don't really need to worry about it too much? So we're not going to really bother about having a particular person that's going to take that role, and it might go over 2 or 3 people. And I don't say that flippantly, because for some organisations, it's a very genuine conversation from a financial perspective about what does that role need to look like. But I am aware that there are a number of organisations, because I've worked with some, where safeguarding really isn't given the priority. And for those organisations, unfortunately, they very rarely realise that they're not giving safeguarding the priority, because on paper, they can tick the relevant boxes. And that becomes very difficult. And it's not necessarily the best culture for safeguarding within the authority and within the particular organisation. So, things to think about. Where does that DSL sit within the hierarchy of the organisation? Do they have the authority to make decisions on behalf of the organisation, or are they always having to go and speak to somebody else before they're able to make a decision? Do they sit at senior leader level? And if so, where in that senior leadership hierarchy are they sitting? And where are they reporting to? Are they reporting directly to the executive or the board, whether that's governors or directors? Or are you requiring them to report 2 or 3 stages below before it goes up to that level? So think about why those positions are in those places, why that reporting structure is in place. Is it still fit for purpose? Does it still work? And if you are really wanting to make a difference within safeguarding for your learners and your students, do you need to tweak where your DSL sits, particularly if you're not needing to necessarily comply with keeping children safe in education? Those are my parting thoughts for you. If you want to have a conversation about where you think your DSL needs to sit and feel like having a sounding board would be really useful, then please do get in touch and send me a message, and we can have a conversation via Teams or Zoom over a cup of coffee, and we can consider how that might work for your organisation. So do please get in touch if you've got any concerns or are just curious about where that should sit for your organisation. I'm Kate Lounders, I'm the CEO of the Safeguarding Association, and I look forward to hearing from you. Take care.